Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out here early. Welcome to ForeFlight's Connected Cockpit presentation. We're glad to have you all out here. We still have some people coming in from back there. My name is Cole Crawford. We are not advancing. Let's go. There you go. My name is Cole Crawford. I'm a product manager here at ForeFlight. As you can see, we have a panel up here as well. We have Thomas Darty, who is another product manager at ForeFlight. Thomas, he's a commercial pilot, multi-engine pilot, and a CFII. I'm a private pilot and instrument rated. And then we have John Zimmerman, the Vice President of Sporties, up here with us as well. And John, as I like to say, has all the ratings. I didn't want to try to fit them all on this slide, but he's an ATP multi-engine pilot, and he flies helicopters as well. So want to do a couple housekeeping items first. So if you guys have questions about anything ForeFlight related at this seminar or after later on after the show, you can always email us at team@foreflight.com. You'll access our pilot support team. We have real people and real pilots, like we like to say. You can also find us here in Hangar C, which is just back over that way. You can see on the map here. So we'll be here all week answering questions, helping you out with subscriptions. We can talk to you about hardware. And then the Sporties team is also here at the show if there's any things you'd like to purchase related to hardware that we talk about today. So what we're going to be going over today is we're going to be talking about the purpose of a connected cockpit. We're going to look at some specific select features that we'll go over, including GPS, weather and traffic in flight, flight plan exchange, and attitude in ForeFlight Mobile. Finally, we're going to wrap up by talking about finding the right solution for you based on what you already have, and then we'll leave some time at the very end for question and answers. With that in mind, please hold any questions that you have until the very end, and we'll try to get to those then. Let's get started. So what is the purpose of a connected cockpit? Well, the main three purposes that we're focusing on today are situational awareness and how these different features can improve your situational awareness, how they can lower your fatigue in the cockpit and keep you more alert, and they can introduce redundancy into your workflow so that if you have certain kinds of failures, you still have some redundancy that will help keep you safe in the long term. First feature we want to talk about, GPS. Many of you are probably familiar with GPS. This is a kind of a core feature of ForeFlight Mobile, but it's often overlooked how important it is to our application. So this here is our moving map. You can see the airplane there in the center. Let's go back one. You can see the airplane there in the center, and your position on the moving map is powered by GPS. So this is great. It's much easier, in my opinion, than looking at a chart and trying to figure out what cross radial or doing this all visually. So there's a lot of opportunity there to lower your fatigue. Also, the things that people aren't as aware that it powers are things like the instrument panel on the bottom. That's how we know what your ETA is, we know what your ground speed is, what your track angle is, and all of those things. So those are great uplifts if you have issues with your panel. You can see which direction you're traveling and also see when you're going to be getting there. It also powers things like geo-referenced charts. We're able, because we know where you are and we know where the chart says you should be, we can put your airplane on an approach chart, which there's more than just approach charts that we can do this with, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Thomas, I wanted to go ahead and just ask you, since you're a CFI, how this feature helps reduce fatigue for your students when you are training.
Yeah, I mean, I think any of us that are instrument rated remember that first instrument approach in real life as you fly down. I mean, it is a heavy workload environment. You're trying to interpret all of these just mess of instruments that you don't know what any of them really mean, and you're trying to relate that back to a paper chart with all these fixes and all of this information on there. Just being able to see and verify what I'm interpreting off the instrument onto the approach plate calms that down. It lets you focus on actually flying the airplane, flying that straight and level, good instrument flying, and not second guess and worry about how you're flying down the approach. So that first time you see yourself fly down the approach there, it's so much easier. And having that GPS is just a game changer in a student's ability to quickly make it through instrument training.
Yeah, that's a great answer there. I want to make sure we also cover it's not just approach plates that we can georeference. A really commonly used one is our taxi diagrams. We can georeference your airplane's position there on a taxi diagram, which is great, especially if you're landing at an unfamiliar airport, you're not familiar with the taxiways there, and as you're taxiing along, it's much easier to see where you are and where that controller is trying to take you. So we'll talk a little bit about GPS sources in ForeFlight Mobile. There are 3 primary sources of GPS and ways you can get it in your iPad. Number 1, you're probably familiar with the Cellular Ipad and how you can get it that way. We also have portable options, and there are installed connecting to your aircraft options, and we'll talk about all 3 of those here. So the Cellular Ipad, I'm sure probably many of you may have it or may be familiar with it. So the Cellular Ipad allows you to have a GPS chip, and that GPS chip will give you your position information. The great thing about using a cellular-enabled iPad as your GPS source is that it is completely self-contained. So anything else goes wrong, you still have your iPad at the end of the day, and that's, there's nothing else that has to connect to. There's no other points of failure. It's very simple there. Second choices are your portable GPS solutions. There's many of them. We're showing our option here called Sentry and Sentry Mini, but there are other portable GPS units just like it. And the advantage to using a system like this is that, again, it's independent from the aircraft. If you have an electrical failure, you're not going to lose your GPS because you have a second and independent system. So it gives you that redundancy. Second of all, it's going to give you WAS level accuracy. And what that means is that your GPS position solution is down to 1 meter at most times, whereas your iPad's not going to be able to do that level of position accuracy. And the third and very often overlooked big reason to move up is multi-constellation redundancy. Your aircraft's GPS and your iPad's GPS are based off of the GPS satellite constellation. Some of these portable receivers like Sentry and Sentry Mini are based off multi-constellations. So the GPS constellation, GLONASS, Galileo, other constellations that are out there. And what that means is if you fly through a GPS jamming exercise or something like that, or there's an issue with the GPS constellation, which you can read the NOTAMs, they are out there, it does happen, then you will be more redundant and more resilient against those kinds of issues that'll happen because you can fall back to other types of constellations for your position solution. So this is a great example here of a ForeFlight user flying through, then actually this is our co-founder, was flying his airplane through, unintentionally or intentionally or unintentionally through a GPS jamming exercise near New Mexico, and his aircraft with, quite an impressive avionics suite went into dead reckoning mode because it didn't know where it was. But his Sentry and ForeFlight Mobile had 1 meter of accuracy. So some great things there. The last thing related to aircraft GPS is connecting to your aircraft's panel itself. So we offer some options to connecting directly to your aircraft's panel. And the great thing about that is that you're going to be getting the exact same solution that your airplane has. So you'll definitely see your airplane exactly where your panel is showing. Those all match. Those are all the same. You get the advantage of the antenna position mounted externally on your aircraft on the top skin, and you're going to have the same accuracy as whatever your panel already provides. So if you have a WAS capable GPS equipped aircraft, then you're going to have WAS level position accuracy on your iPad. Good news is I want to pitch all of you guys, there's a lot of things here, to our buying guide, which we have available in the booth and online, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. If you have questions about specifics of which panels we connect to, everything's available in our buying guide, and that's going to be kind of the theme I'll be pitching you guys to there throughout the presentation today. We want to get into traffic. We wanted to get through GPS kind of quickly there because we know traffic's an important feature that people ask us a lot about and are really happy to talk about and are really excited about in general. So what is traffic in ForeFlight Mobile? So there are 3 primary kinds of traffic that we have. There's Adsb traffic, there's FLARM traffic, and there's internet traffic. So we'll go through these real quick. Internet traffic is something we released in the last 2 years, so we haven't had it at Osh yet. So you guys have probably seen this at home if you have it. And internet traffic is powered by FlightAware and only works over the internet. It's great when you're at home for checking out how busy the pattern is, or seeing which runway's in use, or seeing which approach is in use. But it's not to be used in flight. There's too much delay in it, and you should not be using internet traffic in flight. John, I was thinking, you guys use this at Sporties to kind of see what's going on at the airport there. Is there any way you actually use this to pre-flight any of the flights that you're going on?
We use it a couple different ways. At our flight school at Sporties, we use it to track flight school airplanes. So, we have sort of a north practice area and a south practice area, and we use that for sort of homemade traffic management. But personally, when I fly, I will use this sometimes on a long cross country for weather. If I see there's a line of weather, I don't want to blindly follow somebody else, but it's a really good clue if I see a lot of people going this way around a line of weather, that may be a route I want to check out. And so I've done that before. And also, as you mentioned, just the arrival flow. We're sometimes going to a big airport, there'll be 19 arrivals if you're coming in an IFR. How do I know which one to use? Well, look at that. There's 47 airplanes stacked up on that arrival. So that's pretty good clue that that's the one I'm going to get.
Yeah, all great uses for it. There's a lot of things you can do pre-flight at home using internet traffic to get an idea of what's happening when you get out there. The next one we're going to hit real quickly is FLARM traffic. So FLARM traffic is air-to-air from any aircraft that are equipped with FLARM transceivers. This is not quite as popular in the United States, but more popular overseas. You'll see some of this. But it basically will give you traffic via air-to-air. It does require a decoding license, which you can purchase on our site at foreflight.com/buy. The main thing we want to get into is ADS-B traffic. This is what you guys are very familiar with, I'm sure, or you've heard your friends talk about it. So ADS-B traffic, we support this over many different modes, and we'll go through a lot of those there. Is basically there's two bands. There's the 1090 megahertz band, and then there's what's often referred to as UAT, which is the 978 megahertz band. And you might remember having to equip your airplane with ADS-B out years ago. We're going to be talking about ADS-B in, and how you can bring that into the panel and how you can see traffic. So there's a lot of different scenarios with what traffic you will see based on how you're equipped, what airspace you're flying in. And our friends at Sporties have created these very nice images of these so you can see what you will and won't see. So thank you to John Zimmerman for that. So we're going to let John go through these different scenarios with you all so that we can all understand better about how ADS-B traffic works.
This gets a little complicated, but I think if you stick with it, it's helpful to really understand. You'll have a better feel for why do I see what I see when I see. So we're going to walk through three scenarios here. And in the first one here, in this case, we've got a Sentry on the window. So we've got a portable ADS-B in receiver, but we do not have ADS-B out in the panel. Maybe we don't fly in busy airspace, so we don't need one. So in this case, the only thing we're going to receive is air-to-air traffic. So here we are in the Cessna. We're in the middle there. And we're going to see that Baron up there at 2 o'clock. And we're going to see him because he is ADS-B out equipped. So he's transmitting in the blind every second. And we have a radio that's tuned in to listen to it. And that's our Sentry. So that's great. We see traffic. The problem is we don't see that airplane in red back there at about 5 o'clock. And that's really because we don't have ADS-B out. There's no ground station to fill in the gaps there. So in this scenario, we see somebody, but we don't see everybody. Now, in the next one, things are a little bit better. Scenario 2, where we still have no ADS-B out in our airplane, but we still have that Sentry. The thing that's different here is now there's an ADS-B ground station, and now that Baron is pretty close to us. So the way ADS-B traffic works is pretty different from weather. ADS-B weather, I like to call AM radio. It's broadcast up, and if you tune in the frequency, you get the weather. There's nothing to it. Traffic is different. You can think of traffic almost like a text message. You get traffic in response to something you send out. So in this case, that Baron transmits out ADS-B out. It essentially wakes up that ground station. That ground station sends back up a customized traffic picture of all the traffic within 30 miles and 7,000 feet, but it's within 30 miles and 7,000 feet of the Baron, not us. So we're going to see his hockey puck, as we call it. We'll see his hockey puck of traffic, which is great. So look what happens. We see another airplane, and he's not even ADS-B out, because that uplink message sends up not just ADS-B traffic, but also Mode C traffic. So this is a case where we can see a lot of traffic, and for many people, you'll see this regularly because so many airplanes have equipped with ADS-B out. You'll be flying in this situation a lot. But notice that we still don't see that red airplane, that one back there at 5 o'clock. And the problem is we don't know that we don't see him. So the main takeaway here is if you're not ADS-B out equipped, if you're not the one getting that customized hockey puck of traffic information, your traffic display is incomplete. So just make sure that you use ADS-B traffic as an aid. It can definitely help. It can definitely prevent a problem, but you still want to keep your eyes outside looking for traffic. Now the good news is scenario 3 here, if you have equipped with ADS-B out, which I'm guessing many of you have, the 2020 deadline has come and gone. In this case, we're the ones transmitting out. We're the ones creating our own hockey puck of information. It's centered on us. So look, we see all the traffic within 30 miles and 7,000 feet. And you'll note we also see that ADS-B out airplane that's outside of our hockey puck because we're still seeing him air to air. So with ADS-B out, you have a almost complete traffic picture. The only thing you won't see is aircraft that don't have a transponder or balloons, gliders that aren't equipped. So if you're ADS-B out equipped, life is good. If you're not, be a little suspicious, keep your head up.
Great, John. Yeah. I just want to mention too, all of our Adsb traffic and using Adsb traffic is in addition to your scan, right? It's definitely not a replacement for looking outside and looking for traffic, but it does lower your fatigue, make that easier, and give you that redundancy, because we all know looking for traffic, especially on a very bright day at the same altitude, can be difficult, and you may miss something. So I want to talk about traffic alerts. So one of the great pieces about traffic in ForeFlight Mobile is not only do we display it on the map, but we color code the targets as well. So when a target becomes more of a threat, it goes to yellow, and then when it becomes a serious problem, we turn it red. There's a visual alert that comes down. You can see up there that says traffic 11 o'clock, 2 nautical miles, 1,000 above. And then we also audibly give you that message as well. So especially if you're connected to a Bluetooth headset, you'll also get that in your headset, and you'll hear those exact words: traffic 11 o'clock, 2 nautical miles, 1,000 above. So that is a extra layer of safety that you're getting. Again, it's not replacing your scan in any way, but it is adding some redundancy to that. And it's much easier to find the traffic when you're looking if you already know where to look. Just gives you that extra layer there. So I think a lot of people, and Thomas, you and I have talked about this a lot, when they hear traffic in ForeFlight Mobile, they immediately think collision avoidance. And it is great for that, and like we've talked about. But there are a myriad of other things that you can use it for to be situationally aware. And I know we've talked about a number of those, Thomas, so why don't you give us an example?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of ways that this can be very helpful. Instructing, a lot of my intention should be on what my student is doing and helping them learn faster. They're paying me to learn to fly airplanes. That's what we want to focus on in there. And so having the traffic alerts through Adsb means that I can focus on them flying and traffic at the same time, because I'm not spending as much time searching for traffic. I can be much faster finding that airplane out there. But the other thing that it's really useful for is keeping everyone ahead of the aircraft, especially if we're getting maybe vectors to final on an IFR flight plan. If I'm watching a line of airplanes all make the same base turn onto that vector, I can be pretty sure that's exactly where I'm going to get that base turn. So instead of getting caught off by that radio call with a new heading and new clearance and everything like that, I know exactly when I'm going to get it. I'm ready for that radio call. I've got my airplane set up and configured. As soon as they give me that heading, we make the turn, we're good to go. And I don't, I'm not in the middle of a conversation and get caught off guard there.
Absolutely. One other one that I personally use a lot is if you're landing on a calm wind day at an unfamiliar airport. Sometimes, you're 20 miles out, you don't know which way the traffic's necessarily landing if there's not a lot of traffic, but you can, or you can't hear it yet on CTAF. But it's nice to be able to look and see, okay, hey, everybody's going around on a right, on a right pattern, which just lets you set up a little earlier, says you don't want to be that guy going around the pattern in the opposite direction. Nobody likes that. So we want to talk about this as well. This is our ground target display. A little known thing is you can also see ground targets in Adsb traffic. So you're on the ground at a big airport or even at a small airport, and if they have Adsb out, you'll see them there on the ground, which is nice. A lot of our airline pilot friends like this because in lower vis, you can see a lot there. You can see which way people are, what taxi routes they're getting. If there's a lot of aircraft stopped on the very end of the runway, that you probably want to go ahead and get in line if you're at a bigger place like that. The other one I want to mention too is crossing traffic can be interesting. You're looking, maybe you're flying IMC and you want to climb to get out of the clouds. And it's good to look and see, oh, hey, there's an airplane directly above me, on my same path. They're probably not going to give me a climb, right? There's a lot of things you can learn by just looking at traffic to stay situationally aware. So if you're interested in figuring out how do I get traffic on ForeFlight Mobile, again, I'm going to pitch you back to the buying guide. We have this available online and we have it in our booth as well. If you look for this column here that says Adsb weather and traffic, you can go through pages 8 to 10 and the buying guide will explain which devices give you which capabilities, and that's all in there for you. The other big one, weather. How do you get weather in flight? This is a great feature that that many of us love. So we'll talk about some of the weather features generically that you can get in flight. The number one, probably most requested thing that we hear people ask about is how do you get radar in flight? What does that look like? This is an image of a flight I was flying a couple months ago. I don't remember exactly. And you can see the weather radar there in flight as I'm approaching my destination. This is a really popular one. You can get things like cloud tops. This is coming in over Adsb, and we'll talk more about what the differences between these different things are. So cloud tops, this is a great rendering of whether or not there are going to be, at what altitude you will top all the clouds is basically what this is, which is great if you are, again, on an IFR flight plan going up and trying to see, can I punch through this layer, or am I just going to be stuck in this forever? PyReps, this is, I think, my all-time favorite in-flight weather feature. This is the only weather product that is actually experienced by other pilots in real time. So this, you can see exactly what's going on, and you can learn a lot just by looking at the quantity and quality of PyReps and get an idea of what's happening in the atmosphere. People often overlook the kind of simple, what I would call, air quotes, simple weather features of ADS-B or datalink weather, which is things like METARs and TAFs, right? There's a lot you can get out of just looking at METARs and having access to that updated thing. John, I know you and I talk about it all the time. It's much nicer when you're on a long cross country to just look at what the weather is at your destination than try to tune an ASOS in a long way away and strain to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, there's two things there that maybe are obvious, but I think people overlook. One is the trend. Reading the trend in a METAR is really valuable. And so if I've got 2.5 hours, I might get 3 updates to that METAR before I land. And that's going to tell me a lot, because a METAR itself is a point observation at one point in time. But if I can look at how that METAR has been changing, the ceiling's lowering, or the visibility is coming up, or the dew point is getting, and the temperature getting closer, the trend really can tell you a lot. And that's the value of monitoring this from a long way out. The other thing that I think not enough people do is take advantage of the tools in ForeFlight to display METARs visually. So it's great to go here on the airport page and read a METAR, but I like to go on the map page and turn on the visual display, because at a glance I can get a really good feel for whether maybe marginal VFR conditions is just localized because that airport's in a valley, or is this really widespread and really the whole state of Ohio is covered in marginal VFR, IFR. So I really encourage you to go beyond just the airport page. On the map page, you can look at just that blue, green, pink, red display of conditions, or you can turn on ceiling or visibility. Those things can really give you a better big picture feel of how the weather conditions are around your destination. And it can give you a good feel on your alternate. Maybe this is my plan B. Maybe my plan B is not really realistic anymore. And while I'm in cruise and I have time, it's time for me to start looking at another plan.
Yeah, you're looking for a plan C at that point.
Exactly.
All great tips. I want to go over a couple weather tips that the three of us have come up with over time here, so we'll kind of take them all one by one. So the first one I'll give is use all of datalink weather strategically and not tactically. So what I mean by that is, if you're seeing a big radar cell, don't try to pick through the 1 inch of space there, right? Make decisions on the order of miles, right? So, large scale decisions, like I'm going to go completely north around this storm or completely south around this storm, or there's icing at this level and I'm going to stay away from it. Not try to making very specific decisions there. The next one, and John, this is actually one that you gave us there, is using layers together to understand the situation.
Yeah, I think a lot of people stop at radar, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too. Weather equals radar. And radar is great, but you're paying for a lot more features than that, and so you should use them all. A great example is, I was talking yesterday with some people about datalink weather, said, well, can you fly through orange on the radar? Well, it depends. Orange in a stratus layer is just rain, and you'll have a smooth ride. Orange in a building thunderstorm is going to be a terrible ride. And so you need to use all the tools together. So turn on lightning. ADS-B has lightning now. Siriusxm has always had it. Radar plus lightning, plus PyReps. Did somebody else go through that and get a bad ride? Plus the METAR. Maybe the METAR says there's a thunderstorm over the airport. Use all of those tools together so that you really have a better, more well-rounded understanding of the atmosphere you're flying through. That can really help if nothing else, it takes some stress out of it, because you can get a better sense for what you're really looking at. Because remember, at the end of the day, radar, as great as it is, all radar is telling you is the reflectivity of the moisture in the air out there. It's not going to tell you turbulence. It's not going to tell you wind. It's not going to tell you about hail. You really need to use some of the other tools out there to get that kind of information.
Yeah, one other great, other layer that you can, or quote unquote layer that you can add in to this, like John's mentioning, to supplement all this is traffic. Look at weather and traffic together. If you see, like John's saying, you're looking at, there's this orange return, I think, can I go through it or not? And then you see a whole conga line of aircraft going around it, might tell you something, right? There's a lot you can learn about what the other aircraft out in front of you, has, like I mentioned, it's not all traffic related to collision avoidance. You can use it to actually understand what's happening and what other decisions people are making. The other one is confirming what you see outside, right? When you're looking outside, that's going to be your best source of information, right? You can see the thunderstorm building, you see it there, it's clearly a thunderstorm. And then you look at your iPad, and that should just confirm what you see outside. It shouldn't remove your vision and prevent you from looking at those things. And John, I think you use the term a lot, calibrating your eyes, right?
Yeah, I really encourage you to fly with weather on almost every trip and view it as training. Even if the weather is good, if you're using it every time you fly, you're calibrating your sense of what does that radar picture look like out the cockpit, because that is what matters. Even when I fly IFR, I deviate around a lot of clouds that may be just green on the radar, but you can tell they're bubbling up. They've got a lot of convection there. And when you get kind of a sense of, well, that right there is an early stage thunderstorm, because that's what it looks out front. That's really powerful. So don't just turn on the radar on bad weather days. Fly with it anytime you're leaving the traffic pattern, I think, because it can really help train your vision. Because that, at the end of the day, my eyes are still the #1 weather avoidance tool I use every time.
Yeah, one of the ones I want to add to that is, unfortunately, I wasn't born with the ability to tell 10 miles out in front of the airplane. So I got to learn how to do that. So looking at METARs and saying, oh, it's reporting 6 or it's reporting 5, and then looking at that and being like, okay, that's what 5 miles looks like. The first time you go up on an MVFR day and you see 3 miles, it does not look like 3 miles. It looks like it is right onto the airplane there. And so understanding and getting a sense of distance using that, it's just as helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one. I personally, still to this day, I look outside and it's really hard to tell what the visibility should be. If you ask me, like, that's 2, I'm not sure. Next one here is really pay attention to the last updated time. So all of these weather products all will tell you when the last time they got an update from, especially radar. You can see that on the slide bar on the bottom. This is important. You want to know how old is the weather information that I'm looking at. And this is especially important when people are looking at thunderstorms and radar, right? That's why I said use it strategically and not tactically. If it's a 10-minute-old image, you don't want to, and it's moving fast, it's not in the same place that it was, when that image was created. So pay very close attention to that. And the last one is kind of going back to what John was saying about experience, which is familiarize yourself with datalink weather. And this is only something you can do with practice and time. Is just like John was saying, is you go fly, you see that, and that image in your mind equates to this on the screen. And then in the future, when you see an image on the screen that looks similar, okay, that is what is happening in the atmosphere. And I'm using all of this experience from my eyes and looking at this and all these layers together to understand what is actually happening in the atmosphere and what experience that is going to create for my aircraft. So the next big question is, how do I get datalink weather in flight? We've talked about all these great features, but now I want to figure out how I can actually get access to it and how I can use it. So there's 2 main ways you can get datalink weather in ForeFlight Mobile. The first is FISB, which stands for Flight Information Service Broadcast, and that's an FAA product of Adsb. So if you have Adsb in, you will be able to get Flight Information Service Broadcast. And there's a lot of products in there, and we haven't covered all of everything that's in FISB. The other product that's out there is Siriusxm, which I'm sure many of you have heard of as well, and that is a subscription-based service. So Adsb Weather, there's 2 main ways to get this. You've got portable receivers like we talked about. So again, a Sentry or Sentry Mini here, you'll get FISB through that. There's installed options as well, which we can talk about, and this will be available in our buying guide. For Siriusxm Weather, your options are pretty much portable XM receivers. There's a few of them that we support. You can see that in our buying guide. And the other thing to know is that Siriusxm, even if you have the receiver, you also have to have a Siriusxm subscription, which you can purchase online. So what's the difference between the 2? Frankly, and John, you and I have talked about this, and Thomas, we've talked about this. This is very hard to actually cover all the minute differences between the 2 products. There are a lot of differences between Siriusxm and Adsb, and I want to just first say that this is not an entirely exhaustive list of all the differences. We only had so much real estate on this slide to go over this, but this is a list of most of the products that people use in these 2 systems. The main 2 things to know in terms of differences are, 1, like I mentioned, Siriusxm is a subscription-based model, so you pay an annual subscription to access Siriusxm, whereas FISB is provided to U.S. taxpayers for free. So not really for free. It comes with your tax money, but we have FISB. There's no extra subscription cost for it. The other big difference is that Adsb, or FISB more specifically, it comes from ground towers. So that means that you will not have this be when you're sitting on the ground, and once you take off and get 1,000 or 2,000, depending on your region, you'll start picking that up. So there's a different way that it's transmitted to you, whereas Siriusxm is satellite based. So you can be on the ground as long as you have view of the sky, you should be able to get your Siriusxm. And they also have different coverage areas, and you can see maps of those online as well. The last feature, or the second to last feature we want to cover, is flight plan transfer. This is one of my favorite things that I love to use this. So we're excited to talk to you about this today. So what is flight plan transfer? So most of the flights that I do, or really all the flights that I do, start with pre-flight planning. And I usually do my pre-flight planning here in the flights list here. So in this case, this is a IFR flight that I'm planning up to Taos, New Mexico. And you can see that it has a number of waypoints here in the route. And it has a couple Victor Airways in there. Well, what typically happens if you don't use this feature is you do all your pre-flight planning, look at your briefing, your route and all that stuff. You fire up the airplane, turn the avionics on, and now you get the pleasure of entering all those waypoints into your navigator or your FMS or whatever it is, which depending on the length of the route, that's not necessarily so much fun. So what flight plan transfer allows you to do is to send your route from our app to your panel, so you don't have to spend all that time entering all those things in. So how you do that, you create your flight plan, you press the little send to button in the top right corner, highlighted in magenta. And then you'll see an option here if you have a connected panel where it says panel with the aircraft in the middle, you click that. And we're using a Garmin navigator in this case, but we support more than Garmin panels, that's just the example here. On your navigator, you'll see a new message appear saying there's a flight plan available for import. You have to click that and activate the flight plan that was received by the panel from the iPad. And now your panel has the exact same flight plan that was on your iPad. So instead of spending 10 minutes on the ground, with your motor running, entering that flight plan to get it all in there into your FMS, you can go through in 3 taps. It also works from the maps page. So let's say it's not necessarily, you didn't use the flights tab, or it wasn't necessarily a crazy route. You can go in and enter it on the maps tab, press that same looking button there in the flight plan drawer, and press send to panel. And that will send the flight plan to the panel. You'll get the same message. Everything works the same from that point on. You can also use this the other direction. So let's say you need to load a flight plan from your panel. You've made some kind of change in your panel, or you just found it was easier to enter it in your panel because that's what you prefer to do. You can also load it from panel. Again, press the same little button there. You press load from panel, and then it will pull in the flight plan that is currently on your panel onto your iPad, and now both match there. One other quick feature I want to point out in this drawer is this auto receive from panel. I personally have that turned on, and what it does is, if you make a quick change, let's say you add a new waypoint in your panel and you're en route or you get diverted, it will automatically, if you make a change in your panel, load that down onto your iPad for you without you having to click all those buttons for you. So that is a very useful feature there, and I'll show you what that looks like. You'll even get a notification saying new flight loaded from panel. The classic use case for this is, let's say you get sent an approach, and when you click activate approach on your panel, that approach will get loaded over in on your iPad, and you're good to go there, because you typically want to activate that from your panel instead of from your iPad there. So John, I know you and we've talked about this feature a lot. There are so many ways to use this, especially on those long flights, and I know you do a lot of those. So why don't you kind of give the crowd an example of how this has reduced your workflow?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you 2 examples, one pre-flight, one in-flight. If I think back 20 years ago when I planned an IFR flight, it was, step 1 was trying to guess what route I was gonna get. I got a pretty good idea if I'm going to a busy airport, I'm not gonna get direct, but how do you know? You pull out the green book and you ask a buddy, and then you call flight service and you file, and then you call clearance delivery and you wait and say, here we go. And then they come back half the time with, I have full route clearance, stand by, ready to copy. Here we go. Well, there's just a much better way to do it now. As Cole said, you go into flights tab there. ForeFlight's going to tell you what other pilots are getting in the recommended routes, right? They'll say that this route has been approved 87 times in the last month. So that's a pretty good clue that that's what I'm going to get. So I tap that, I file it, and then an hour before takeoff, ForeFlight's going to send me a message that says, here's your expected route, which I get about 99% of the time. So I already know what I'm going to get, and when I get that expected route in ForeFlight, I make that my active route on my iPad right away. Now when I get to the airplane, I call clearance delivery and they say, cleared this, and this. Well, I know that because I already was told to expect it. All I do is hit send to panel, and in 2 seconds, I have my flight plan loaded in the panel. It saves so much time on the ground with the engine running because I had a pretty good idea what to file. I knew what I was going to get. I had it preloaded in my iPad. It's just a matter of syncing it with the panel. Now, en route, kind of goes the other way. A lot of times, if I'm deviating around weather, we talked about using datalink weather, I'm not going to try to pick through a line. I'll often call air traffic control and say, I'd like to change my flight plan. There's a big line up here, there's a big cell. I want to go to this VOR and then this VOR, and we're just going to sort of dog leg around it. And so the easy thing to do there is on my panel, I'll look at that looks good, update the flight plan on the panel, and then it'll automatically sync to my iPad, because the iPad to me is a better screen for doing weather deviations. It's bigger, it's easier to kind of pan and zoom and drag things. So I'll do a lot of the prep work on the panel, but at the end of the day, I want to have it active, or I'll do the prep work on the iPad, but at the end of the day, I want the panel to have the final one. So I use this feature all the time. I have a flight stream in the GTN 750 I fly with, and it seemed kind of like a luxury at first. I sort of thought, I mean, who cares? Like, how hard is it to sync a flight plan? But I tell you, it's one of those things, once you have, you find all kinds of uses for it. I use it literally every single time I fly.
Yeah, it's definitely great. And one other thing to mention on John's deviation example there, that is another great add into that, is if you're familiar with ForeFlight's map, when you can rubber band routes, a lot of times if you're getting deviated and you're going into an area that you don't know, you may not know the fix that you want to even choose to go around the storm, right? But instead what you can do is you can just grab the map line and drag it over to the area that looks, about right. And ForeFlight will show you all the waypoints that are nearby that area where you dropped the route line on, and then you just say, hey, ATC, I want this fix, and then direct. And you don't have to go hunting and pecking and looking for fixes for hours on your IFR chart. So that's a great way to do that. Now the obvious question again is, how do I get this? Well, first thing I'm going to do, again, back to the buying guide. Really recommend checking that out. We have a lot of those in our booth. You can also access it online at foreflight.com/buying-guide-PDF. You can see the digital version there. So on there, you'll see all the different panels that we connect to, what equipment is required to make those connections, and if there's any other kind of things that you need to connect to make that work. The last feature we want to talk about today is attitude. So specifically backup attitude. So here's an image of my iPad, and you can see on the top here, the top half of the screen, we have ForeFlight's synthetic vision view, which you can open by clicking the synthetic vision button up here. And in the synthetic vision view, it's not just backup attitude. Yes, you can see your pitch and your roll and your current track, and you can see your ground speed and your altitude, but you can also have something else which your plane may not have, which is synthetic vision itself, which means that you can see the terrain features behind you as if you could see digitally and through the panel, more or less. So there you can see the runway that I'm approaching. You can see in this area, it's pretty flat, so there's not a lot of great terrain back there, but we have color-coded terrain and color-coded obstacles. And we also show you traffic in synthetic vision as well, if there is any traffic in that area. So this is a great feature that I like to use, especially on approaches or on takeoffs. Here it is in full screen, so you can open it in full screen if you'd like to, especially if you have 2 iPads. You can have this open in full screen on one and have another iPad that's just looking at your charts or whatever it might be. So the other thing that people don't realize that backup attitude gives you is that we can also record this over time in your track logs, if you're familiar with track logs in ForeFlight Mobile. So you can see how your pitch and bank changed relative to your speed or other things like that, and see that over time. And so Thomas, I know you use this with students, so I'll let you talk a little bit more about this feature.
I mean, hopefully we're all debriefing some flights as we go along here, and adding the pitch and bank information just adds that picture. So you can see, oh, that last landing we did there, we went up and did a little practice. That last landing was really rough. Let's see what the pitch and bank was on those good landings and see what it looks like on that bad landing, and see, what do we need to change here? Are we coming in too hot? Am I being too aggressive in a turn as we go around? And it adds just that little bit of extra, interpretation to what was happening in the airplane. And I can also bring that over into the 3D function we have for track log review and see that pitch and bank as we go through. So it's just so much nicer to be able to debrief with the additional information of having pitch and bank. It really helps us as individuals make sure we're continuing to learn in the airplane as we go through.
Absolutely. One other thing I want to mention is this also, and a big reason why a lot of people use this and why we recommend it is that it introduces redundancy into your systems here. You know, we all hear about the dreaded vacuum pump failure, right? What are you going to do in that case? So in the case that you have a backup attitude on your iPad, that will give you that extra layer of safety. It's not to be used as primary, but if something were to happen, you're not completely up a creek, right? You do have a backup solution there. The second thing I like to mention is that I find it really reduces my fatigue and workload, especially if you're flying an IMC. Having it up when you're looking down on an approach plate gives you that extra, just keeping it in your peripheral vision just lowers your workload because you remain aware of what your attitude is while you're looking down at an approach plate. So those are great. But John, you talk about all the time how you use it in VFR flying. And a lot of customers do tell us, oh, we don't need that because I'm not an IFR pilot. But like you said, you use it VFR all the time.
Yeah, I mean, this Attitude's a great IFR feature, no doubt. I view my Sentry, my iPad, as my go-anywhere backup. I get to jump around between different airplanes, and I know if I have my iPad, my Sentry, I'm set. I got backup Attitude, I got GPS, weather. So it's great for IFR, but I think a lot of people do mistake it for an IFR feature. I use the synthetic vision view all the time. I flew up here this week in a Robinson R-44 helicopter, so we never got higher than 700 feet. And obviously VFR, there's no option of going IFR, but this is great for that. It's great for an awareness of obstacles, of terrain, of ground features. It's great for traffic. I was coming up the Chicago shoreline, and if you've ever done that run along the Chicago shoreline, it's beautiful, but there's a lot of airplanes there. And it sounds kind of like a gimmick, but I'll tell you, in that example, the 3D traffic where you see the traffic flying across your synthetic vision display is a really great way to find traffic, because instead of constantly looking, I know right there, I can look right there, and it saves a lot of time finding the traffic. So even if you're VFR, don't tune out the backup Attitude synthetic vision. It's a great confidence builder, great kind of, I wouldn't say it gives you maybe information you don't have, but as Cole said many times, it's like a fatigue reduction. It makes it easier, it's less stressful, and it's a more understandable way to view it. So I use it all the time in low-level VFR.
Yeah, we hear from a lot of our VFR pilots that are doing low-level stuff that they use it because they like to see the obstacles, especially on a bright, sunny day, you're low. It's hard to see those, white and red cell phone towers. It can be pretty difficult. And even if you can see it, it just gives you that extra backup. Okay, my eyes, this are all agreeing, that's where it is, I'm not going to fly into it. That's just a very nice thing there. And the other one that I use it as well for VFR flying is I like to have it up when I'm flying at night VFR, especially landing at an airport that I've never landed at before, because it's very, as you know, it can be hard to figure out the runway and get a good visual on it, and being able to see that like you can here in this view in synthetic vision gives you that extra layer. Okay, I can see the runway, I'm lined up with it, those are the lights I'm expecting, and it gives you that extra peace of mind there. So going back to how do I get Attitude in my aircraft now? So there's a couple options here. Again, we support both portables and installed options. And I'll pitch you again to the buying guide, pages 8 through 10. All the connection stuff is in there. And you want to look for this area here where you see backup Attitude and look down this list. And it's on different pages as well, separated by installed and portable. Make sure you check that out. There's a good chance that you might already have something that supports this. So take a look what's already there. The last area we want to get into is we want to all talk together about how do you decide what the right solution is for you to get the features that you want out, and what right combination of things do you need to purchase to make this happen, and what makes the most sense. So we'll take these one by one. First thing I tell people to ask themselves is, what kind of flying do you do? Let the types of missions that you want to fly inform the decisions for what you need. Secondly, think about what you already have. Some of you may already have a Sentry. Some of you may already have a transponder that connects to ForeFlight Mobile that will give you some of these things. Some of you may have an IFR navigator that gives you some of these things. And then also think about what you already have in the panel and which things that you would like redundancy for, and how important that area of redundancy is to you with your mission. Specifically think about GPS and position and Attitude, and how redundancy there is or maybe is not important to you. The last thing is, again, check out our buying guide, available in the booth, Hangar C, or online at foreflight.com/buying-guide. I would recommend checking that out. Again, there's a lot you can learn from that. And we can also help you in the booth if you have really nitty-gritty specific questions about your exact setup that you have now or something you're considering purchasing. So ways to learn more. Like I said, John will be over at the Sporties booth if you have some questions specifically for him, and Thomas and I will be around this week to answer questions in our booth. But you can also always get some resources on your own if you want to just read more. I highly recommend the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile. You can access that in our app by going to Documents, selecting the ForeFlight catalog, and selecting Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile. It is quite exhaustive, but it will have all the nitty-gritty answers to a lot of these questions that you have, and I highly recommend checking that out, especially related to weather and traffic. There's lots of great information in there about each and every layer and how they work and what the legends are. Take a good look at that. We release videos with all of our releases, so you can watch videos on each feature. They're typically 5 minutes. Great source of information, and just to learn maybe something you didn't know already, or learn about a feature you didn't know was there. We also release stuff on our blog, blog.foreflight.com, and we have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for. Again, going back to how can we help? Okay, great, this is a great source of information, but now I have specific questions. How can I get help on my particular transponder or whatever it is? Like I mentioned earlier, you can always email us at team@foreflight.com, and I highly recommend doing that, especially if it's a pretty complicated issue. But the last thing I'd like to say is that we will be taking some questions and answers here in a second, so I'll point you to that. But again, last thing to remember is check out the Pilot's Guide and check out our videos online. Thank you all for being great listeners. And thank you to John and Thomas for participating and being great speakers as well here with this and providing a lot of feedback. I want to go ahead and open it up to Q&A if anyone has any questions that I can answer or that we all can answer. So just raise your hand, we'll go one at a time. So sir, you're up here in the front, I'll ask you first.
A lot of these features are redundant on modern glass panel. Can you speak to how to use them together, or what takes precedence?
Sure. So.
In flight, not flight planning at all.
Sure. Okay. So just to repeat the question for the audience. So the question is that a lot of the features that we just showed can be redundant to a modern glass panel. And his question was essentially, if you have that modern glass panel, how do you use them together and why is that important? Is that a good representation of your question? Okay. So what I would recommend is think about first, redundancy can be a great thing that you want to have. So for example, if you have a modern glass panel and your electrical system goes out, well, consider what you will lose or how long you will still have that, right? Whereas in this case, this gives you that extra backup if you find yourself in that unfortunate situation. So that's number one there. But two, certain things you want to be aware of, which one should I look at and which one should I not? And for example, attitude will take that. This should be used as a backup source of attitude, and you should definitely still, if you have a certified source of attitude in your aircraft, that should be your primary, because that's what that is designed to do. This is designed as a last case scenario there, as you're in a situation, you need to get out of it, or you just want a second thing to look at. But make sure you tell yourself in your head, this is my primary, this is my backup, and that's how I'm going to use it.
And I fly an airplane that has a Garmin G600 TXI and a flight stream, and I also fly with a Sentry for that same redundancy reason. You can connect. This thing is worth pointing out. You can connect to both at once most of the time. The flight stream is a Bluetooth connection. The Sentry is a Wi-Fi connection, so the iPad will support the connection to both of those. Usually the panel takes precedence. If I'm doing that, usually it's going to be the panel Ahars that's driving the attitude and the panel weather receiver. But it does depend. Kind of every setup's a little different, so it's hard to be exact. But in general, I think it's safe to say the panel takes precedence. But I still like doing both. I still like to have both because while the integrated panel is fantastic, it is integrated, and if it has a bad day, I lose it all, my traffic and weather and GPS and Ahar. So,
yeah, that extra redundancy is great. And then the other one is for people like Thomas, CFIs, right? I mean, you move airplanes around, so the integrated panel in his airplane is only good when he's in his airplane.
Yeah, it's real nice when somebody comes with a G1000, 172, but somebody pulls up in a 152 with a 6-pack and a, Bindex King transponder in there. It's nice to be able to bring the same capabilities and the same tools into an aircraft that otherwise maybe not even have an electrical system in there. So having the portability of the Sentry, every aircraft has now got all of those tools for me.
Yeah, great there. Sir, I see the red shirt, hat in the back.
Most airplanes, a lot of these people, you make it sound so easy. Everybody has to have at least Flight Stream 210 in order to download your, or whatever, an equivalent in order to download. I bet a lot of people here don't have that.
Yeah, so each panel, and this is all in our buying guide, depending on what your navigator is, certain manufacturers require certain add-ons. So in the case of Garmin is what you're talking about. Some of their navigators require that and some do not. So it's why it's important to make sure you check out our buying guide for your specific example, because there are cases where you may have, for example, a GNS 430 WASP that will require a flight stream in order to send panels back and forth. Some do not, some do. Please check out our buying guide to see what you have and what's required to make that work for your particular situation.
I just point out real quick, we talked about when thinking about buying avionics, whether it's portable panel, I'd really encourage you to think about what features you want before you go down in the weeds of model numbers and this and that. Think about, I want weather, I want attitude, I want flight plan sync, because flight plan was kind of the last to come. There's lots of different options to get weather, traffic, GPS. Flight plan sync, as you'd expect, depends on your panel. But Garmin, for one, has really pushed that feature down where you can get it in the GNX 375 and some others. So there's some much more affordable panel options that have it built in that you don't have to go back and add a flight stream on.
Yeah, the last few models they put out, there's several of them now that don't require the flight stream to do that feature, but many of the older ones do require that, as you said. Yes, sir, I've seen your hand up for a while.
Yeah, when you talk about ADS-B weather or traffic on the ground or weather, some of your data has that where you're sitting on the ramp. The minute you turn ForeFlight on, it goes to Wi-Fi, and you lose it. Why can't the Wi-Fi come up after you get airborne? Serious weather is there all the time, but ADS-B is not on ForeFlight.
Yeah, so the question there is, basically, if you have ADS-B weather over Wi-Fi, you're not going to be able to get ADS-B weather on the ground like I mentioned earlier because it's based on ground stations. And so you have to usually get it, depending on where you live, 1,000, 2,000 feet to start getting it, right? So the gentleman is asking, if you have a cellular equipped iPad and you have LTE, like you have the actual service enabled and you're paying for the service on your iPhone or iPad, when you connect to Wi-Fi, you won't be able to access the LTE. You basically won't have internet radar while you're on the ground if you have LTE. And that is correct there. That's the current limitation of the app and the way we've designed it to work. The main reason is LTE in the air is typically pretty unreliable for bringing in radar images. But we do appreciate your feedback and we'll consider that there.
I'll give you one quick tip. You can swipe down from the top right of your iPad to get that control center with the Wi-Fi and everything. So I will turn on my Sentry and let it start cooking, but I will turn off Wi-Fi, and it's 2 seconds before you take the runway to swipe down, Wi-Fi on, and off you go.
Yeah.
Not to say I wouldn't like to see the feature in the app, but
yeah.
It's a quick workaround.
Other questions? Seeing you back there, red shirt. No, that's you. Yeah,
Yes.
Magenta shirt maybe.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you're looking at traffic, how can you tell whether you're looking at internet traffic or ADS-B traffic?
Okay, so the best way to tell is on the top left corner of the map, there will be a little thing that'll say, for example, if you're flying with a Sentry, let's just use that as the example for ADS-B traffic. It'll say Sentry, so you know that layer there is powered by Sentry. Whereas if you're on internet traffic, you'll see internet traffic. And the other way you can see it is if you tap on a traffic target, you'll see the source of the traffic target. So for example, you tap on November 1234, it'll say on the bottom of the little box that shows up there, it'll say 1090 megahertz or it'll say 978. So you know even which frequency it's coming over as well. Yes, sir.
If I want to get a weather briefing, do I calculate it without actually downloading flight?
So the question is weather briefings and accessing them without filing a flight plan. So if you create a flight in our flights list there, you don't have to file. You can just press briefing and it'll generate a weather briefing for you, whether or not you file the flight plan. Yes, and that does actually count as an official briefing there. Yes, sir. So you're saying that you flew an instrument approach that had a course reversal but because of the angle you were coming in, you chose to not fly the procedure turn or the course reversal. Sure. Thomas, do you happen to know the answer to this one? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so when you got your route up there, like your route bubble, you've got little green, I've been flying this approach in there. If you tap on that, you can actually expand all of the waypoints of that approach. So it'll show you all of the different, I've got my final approach fix, my course reversal, my intermediate fix and everything like that. I can then take the course reversal fix out of there and just fly my courses all the way through. So when you got your route, your flight plan drawer that comes down where you see like the little airport bubbles in there, the green one that'll have your instrument approach listed in there. Tap on that, and then you can expand. You have a bunch of different options in there. You can just expand that out, remove your course reversal.
Awesome. Yes, sir, right here in the blue.
On my last flight, I had the synthetic version, and wings were running. On the synthetic version, I would say it had 50
Sure. So I can actually show you here in the slides if we're not too far away from that part. So you can calibrate your Ahar source, right? Because we have to know what level is for you. So to do that, when you're connected to Sentry or any of your sources here, you click this little gear icon here in the synthetic vision view, and that'll bring up a view which will have a calibrate button, and you can calibrate that there. And then there's, for certain devices like Sentry, we also support an auto calibration option, and that routine will run while you're on the ground, so we can, we know it's stable, and we'll run the calibration so it matches your airplane there. But no, you don't have to calibrate it every time. So yes, the way you can do this gear icon will be there for both Stratus and Sentry. Yeah, so there are a lot of differences between Stratus and Sentry in general, but as far as the attitude display should be the same regardless of whether you have Stratus or Sentry. Yes, they both have ADSB weather, yes sir. And you can check all this out in our buying guide as well. Yes sir.
One more question. With the iPad plugged into this big 2-watt outlet, USB to power the battery, I find that once it was on the synthetic vision decrease, was a problem power on
I've never heard that report before. You can email us at team@foreflight.com. I don't believe that there's any reason to expect that the iPad would draw more power.
Any recommendations on that?
Say that again?
Any recommendations on
John would be happy to set you up with all of the power options in your airplane.
Yes.
I'm totally biased, but we designed a battery pack because we were so sick of flying with all the cheap, drugstore ones. So we have a battery pack that's 20,000 milliamp hours, so it's big, and it has 3 USB outputs that are all high amp. So a lot of times the cheap ones will have one 2 amp output and one 1 amp plug. The one we have has 2 2.4 amp and one 3 amp. So you can plug iPad into any one of those. You don't have to buy ours, but when you are looking for whatever charging, make sure you're getting at least 2 amp plugs, whether it's a cigarette lighter or a battery. You want 2.4 is even better for some of the power hungry iPads. Just make sure you're getting those high amp outputs. $70.
Is it $70 there? Yeah, I think that also really depends on what model iPad you have. A lot of the older iPads used to be able to charge off of like a 1 amp plug in there, but any of the newer models, some of them won't even charge with a lower amp plug. So you really need to make sure you're at that 2.4 amp plug in whatever power solution you have.
Yes, sir, here.
On your synthetic vision, is it better to set the horizontal horizon on the ground or in the air?
I would say that typically depends on your aircraft. A tail dragger, right? If you do it on the ground, you're going to be how many ever degrees pitch up that is for your particular airplane. For the tricycle airplane I fly, it doesn't really have an effect, so I do it on the ground. But you can do it in the air if you're straight and level.
That calibration that Cole was pointing out earlier in there, there's actually the ability to not only just level the synthetic vision, but you can manually adjust in there as well. So if you are flying an aircraft that you know is a tail dragger and you're sitting at 10 degrees nose up or something like that on the ground, you can go through and manually adjust that calibration. So if you have an aircraft that is not quite sitting level, you can do that on the ground. I prefer to do it there because I don't have to hold the airplane quite as steady as we go through, but either way, it'll work. Just kind of depends on your situation in the airplane.
Yeah, that's a great point there, Thomas. Yes, sir.
You have to know the flight stream that's available for the 430 loss. If it's something that you has to be sent into, or some add-on program, you have to know.
So I believe, so there's the Flight Stream 210 and there's a Flight Stream 510. The Flight Stream 210, which is compatible with the 430W, that one is actually hardwired in the panel, so that is something that you can't just go and do yourself. The 510 is a little SD card that goes in the in the typical slot, and that doesn't require an avionics shop to do that or anything.
But the 430 itself doesn't have to go back to be upgraded or anything. The 210 is just sort of a blind box that gets mounted behind the panel, so it's a fairly quick install, but it does require install.
Yeah, it's not a life-changing, out for months kind of problem, but it is something that you won't be able to just go in and do it yourself. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, in the back. Oh, how do you access pitch and bank and track logs? I think was the question there. There we go. Thomas, this is your favorite subject.
There we go, yeah. So on the very bottom along the track log there, you'll notice your 4 buttons. Most of your track logs, if you've recorded them without an Ahar's equipped, Sentry or Stratus in there, you'll just see speed and altitude. And those are things you're recording off of your GPS. But if you do have an Ahar's, connected to your ForeFlight while you're recording your track log, those 2 additional buttons off to the right there will be lit up for you, and you can add access pitch and bank in there.
Good question there. Any other questions? We got one more. Yeah, here you go.
Cloud tops. Can you go into a little bit of the feature of cloud tops and how that feature works?
Sure. So Cloud Tops is a feature provided by Adsb, or that's what I was showing back on the slide here. Let me come back here. Couple for you. And there we go. There's Cloud Tops. So basically what happens is you're getting this over FISB, like I mentioned, right? It's coming through, you're in flight, it's picking all this up. And then what happens when you load this, there's an altitude selector on the right. You can see in this particular image, I have 6,000 selected. So it's only showing me tops that are above 6,000 in this image. And then what you see here is right now I don't have the legend up, but there is a legend available for this as well, which will tell you which color equates to which altitude that the tops are at in that area. So you can see the blue here. Anywhere where you see this blue, this is the highest possible option. Those cloud tops are very, very high, right? I think I forget what the top of the legend is, but it's like 20-something thousand feet. So you can tell basically what level the clouds are at based on the legend, and that legend is available both at the bottom of the map in our newer releases. Unfortunately, this image doesn't have that, and then it is also available in the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile as well.
I find Cloud Tops really helpful, but it's worth remembering that it's a forecast product, and it's from 2,000 feet to 24,000 feet. So it's good for like a big picture. Here you could look and see, out to the north, it's pretty low tops or even clear. To the east or southeast here, I've got really high tops, but it's the same sort of strategic versus tactical speech, that it's not like, I should be good at 10,000, but at 9,000 I would be in it. It's really not that precise because it's a forecast tool. So it's good for that big picture. Where are the really high tops and low, but don't try to zoom in too tight on it.
Great point there, John. Yes, sir.
When I zoomed in to, especially like read the 3-letter code, the frequency, those stay the same. The outside will expand. But what I want to read remains the same.
So the question there is, how do you change the font on the map? Thomas, I think we have a setting for that. I could be wrong about that.
So anything that is like the data-driven aeronautical map font in there. So we can't do anything about like the sectional or the low en route. But if you're using any of our data-driven map, the aeronautical map in there, Yeah, we're on the maps page here. Along the very top up there, the third option is a little gear icon. And down there a little bit, there'll be like a small T and a bigger T on a little slider. You just take the slider and move it a little closer over to the bigger T, and all of our data-driven labels will get bigger.
Okay, I think that's great. Like I said at the very end, you can see us at the booth if you have further questions, and we'll hang around here for just a few minutes as well. Thank you all for coming, and have a great time at Oshkosh.